Good evening. Thank you so much for your patience tonight. We're so happy to have you all here with us. My name is Dr. Carla Barquero, and I am the director of the Sarah T. Hughes Center for Politics and an assistant professor for political science and international relations here at Goucher College. I would like to welcome you all to this evening's discussion entitled The United States and Africa, Changing Priorities. This event is the first in the Distinguished Speaker Series co-organized by the Baltimore Council on Foreign Affairs and the Sarah T. Hughes Center for Politics. We are so excited to enter into this partnership to facilitate public dialogue and engagement on foreign policy and international affairs at such an important time in world politics. The Sarah T. Hughes Center is named after Goucher alumnus Sarah Tillman Hughes, class of 1917, who was the first woman in Texas to be appointed justice to the federal district court. Judge Hughes was a proud Baltimorean and a staunch advocate for human rights, particularly on racial and gender equity. The Hughes Center was founded in the 1950s with a grant from the Morris and Laura Falk Foundation and later funded by an endowment Hughes herself left to the center. The mission of the Hughes Center is to facilitate student engagement in and participation with the world of politics outside of the classroom. The Hughes Center reflects the vital mission at the heart of Goucher College, which is centered on providing innovative liberal arts education that prepares students with a broad, humane perspective for a life of inquiry, creativity, and critical and analytical thinking. Through our work at the Hughes Center and across the Goucher community, we are dedicated to inspiring global change makers. Thank you to our partners at the Baltimore Council on Foreign Affairs, specifically Roy Gutman and Emily Thayer, to all the Goucher staff who have assisted with the planning and organizing of tonight's event. You are wonderful, and we appreciate you all. To our faculty, staff, and students, BCFA members, and members of the public in the audience, both in person and online, thank you for being here with us tonight. And to our speakers, Dr. Christopher Fomunyoh and Ambassador Tibor Nagy, we appreciate you sharing your insights with us this evening.
Thank you, Carla. On behalf of the trustees of the Baltimore Council, we welcome our members, and we are thrilled to be here at Goucher for our first joint program. Our program this evening is on the changing U.S. priorities in Africa. The shorthand description might be, and it's a little bit irreverent, we're not sending foreign aid, but we're looking for rare minerals. U.S. policy is kind of complicated and interesting and deserves to be explained. The U.S. is now deporting illegal immigrants to African states, including non-Africans. But it's also deporting Africans who had temporary protected status. It all seems a little bit short-sighted. Meanwhile, Africa has crisis after crisis. Roughly a third of the African states are in an active conflict. There are something like 35 million, possibly more, internally displaced people. Sudan has had a mass slaughter in the last week by the rapid support opposition forces. It's already had the worst humanitarian crisis in the world, with as many as 13 million displaced from their homes. There were elections in Cameroon and Tanzania, and they went badly. There was a military coup in Madagascar. This is all just in the last 2 weeks. Jihadis are threatening to capture the country of Mali. And President Trump, the very latest off the news, has threatened to send troops into Nigeria because of alleged mistreatment of Christians there. Unemployment is said to top 60% on the continent. Boko Haram and ISIS affiliates operate in more than a dozen countries. So the question is, does the U.S. have a practical approach to Africa today? Can it work? What is missing? We have a star panel tonight. Ambassador Tibor Nagy served as Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs in the first Trump administration. He was Undersecretary of State for Management in the first months of the second Trump administration. He was ambassador to Ethiopia and to Guinea, as well as deputy ambassador to Nigeria, Cameroon, and Togo. For 15 years, he was the vice provost for international affairs, and this is a rather nicer place or calmer place, at Texas Tech, which is the same college or university where he received his BA degree. He advised two presidential campaigns, Barack Obama in 2008 and Mitt Romney in 2012. He is a native of Hungary, having fled in 1957 with his family after the Hungarian Revolution. Dr. Christopher Fomunyoh is the Senior Associate for Africa at the National Democratic Institute, where he organized and advised international election observers missions to 11 countries, supervised democracy support missions to 17. He's an expert, obviously, on democratization in Africa. He holds a law degree from Yaoundé University in Cameroon, a master's degree in international law from Harvard, and a PhD in political science from Boston University. He is an adjunct professor at the African Center for Strategic Studies. He's the founder of a nonprofit organization supporting democracy and humanitarian causes in his native Cameroon. So tonight we're going to do this as a chat, followed by questions. And again, we have a place there to line up for questions after we've ended the first part of our discussion. Chris, who is just back from the Côte d'Ivoire, and observed from a distance the elections in Cameroon, which were very controversial. He can give us, and what I want to ask him to do is to give us a short overview of how you see the Trump administration's new priorities. Is it practical? Can it work? Does America first mean Africa last? Tibor, well, some of us saw you last night on BBC describing the horrors of the situation in Sudan. You've been on the inside of the administration. Africa has problems, but it has potential. Is the administration taking Africa seriously?
Chris and I have known each other a long time. We were coming up in the car together. Said it seemed like just yesterday, 1992, the Cameroon elections, when we met as observers. So we share passion for certain African countries. So we'll have a good discussion tonight.
Well, thank you very much, Ambassador Tibor Nagy, for those very kind words, and thanks, Roy, for the invitation and the kind words of introduction as well. Let me just say what a delight it is to be with you all this evening, and to thank members of the Baltimore Council as well as the Hughes Center for the invitation. I think we're living in interesting times, and when you think about the statistics that Roy just laid out with regards to current developments in Africa, sometimes they could be pretty challenging, if not outright depressing. But at the same time, as Roy said, Africa has got quite some opportunities. And I think to set the stage for our conversation, it's important to remind ourselves that Africa is 1.5 billion people. That's a huge market right there. Africa has got the mineral resources that we all talk about. That's why everyone is trying to get in to find the rare minerals. It's projected that in 25 short years, Africa will be close to 2.5 billion people, which means between 25 to 28% of the world's population, and 1 in every 4 adults or every 4 human beings on the surface of the earth would be African, and that's huge. It's also projected that in 25 years, of the youthful population on earth, in the world, 33% or 1/3 of that population, youthful population, will be African. And so everyone has really got a vested interest in making sure that Africa plays its role on the global stage and is part of the world. And I think that the superpowers of today are looking at all of that and trying to figure out how they can best engage. It's become quite a competitive process because when you look at Africa today, everyone is trying to build relationships, everyone is trying to get a share of the action. The Chinese are in there big time, that's a known fact. The Russians are also trying to get in there as well. The Middle Eastern, some of the Middle Eastern countries are also getting in there as well. And I would kind of turn the conversation into saying it's not a question of whether the administration should have a policy. It's a question of it's in America's interest to have a policy that's coherent on Africa and to engage Africa in a way that could be meaningful and beneficial for both sides or for all sides. I look forward to a very fruitful conversation and getting into more details on some of the specific questions that you all may have. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Chris. Okay, I want to give you just a general overview from my own point of view, and it's a delight to be retired for the 4th time so that the words coming out of my mouth are my own, not the ones that are written for me, by various parts of the bureaucracy. First of all, some truths. Africa has been, continues to be, and probably will be for the time being, the lowest U.S. priority in foreign affairs, okay? That's not saying that Africa's not important. It's saying that it's the lowest priority. And I compare this to a basketball pickup game of Olympic athletes. They're all Olympic athletes, but somebody gets picked up last. So, I'm starting with that. Also, U.S.-Africa policy has been basically driven by the NGO humanitarian and development community, which again goes to explain why it has been the lowest geographic priority, because it really does not have a very powerful constituency in the United States, which is very unfortunate for those of us who love Africa and for those of us who follow Africa. As a matter of fact, the U.S.-African relationship has been, I would say, somewhat dysfunctional. We have given billions and billions and billions, I'm not trying to emulate a certain president, of development assistance, humanitarian assistance, and the two are very distinct. It's very important to realize that the two are distinct. And the dysfunction out of that has been that the African governments, most of them have come to expect that development assistance as forever. They put that into their budgets on a regular basis. And the United States has come to accept that as giving us a patronizing relationship when we can basically carry a megaphone and tell the Africans that everything that they're doing is wrong. Feel free to criticize them. One of the results has been we've had a lot of what I call Potemkin democracies in Africa that have the institutional framework of what a democracy would be, but it is not if you look behind the windows and the doors. And also what we were talking about was a lot of pretend elections, where they go through the form of an election so that it checks the box so that they think that they will continue to receive foreign assistance and development assistance. Current situation in Africa is about the bleakest I have seen it since I've started following the continent in 1978 for my first assignment in Lusaka, Zambia. It is unfortunately a continent of conflicts, growing extremism, coups, horrendous governance, declining democracies, and growing despair in the population. Now, Chris alluded to what I think is one of the most important factors at work in Africa right now. When you look past what I just mentioned, you have what I referred to when I was Assistant Secretary as the youth tsunami. That, I think, is going to be the most important force that the world is going to have to contend with, and that will be manifested in either very positive ways or very negative ways, depending on what happens on the continent. I can tell you that the youth across the board are hungry for economic opportunities, they're hungry for legitimate governments, and they're hungry for basic government services. If they don't get them, it's going to be incredible problem for the world. Now, Trump won. When I was Assistant Secretary, we tried to kind of form programs around that. We did not succeed very well. Now, Trump 2 is going to be, I think, a lot different because the administration now is much more secure than it was during Trump 1. And they brought more people in that they already knew that they wanted to bring in. We do not have an Assistant Secretary for African Affairs, which is very, very sad. I came in 2018 after about a year and a half. I hope it doesn't take that long because the Assistant Secretary is a critical position. But what I expect to see during Trump 2, in Africa policy specifically, I look forward to seeing a lot of what I would call transactional diplomacy, where it will be the Trump administration dealing with individual countries, not systematically. I think that the Africa relationship will be led more and more by the business, commercial, investment priorities as opposed to the development and humanitarian. I think that this administration will be willing to work with all forms of government, not like previous administrations, which basically said that if you have a coup, we're going to stop working with you. I think that in that regard, this government will be, this administration will be a lot more practical. They will try to end conflicts. We have seen that with President Trump's senior advisor for Africa, Boulos, already active in the Democratic Republic of Rwanda. And allegedly, he says that he is close to getting a ceasefire in the horrendous Sudan conflict. We're both somewhat dubious. We're hoping for the best. Hopefully that will come out. But as I said at the beginning, Africa will remain the lowest priority for the U.S. government as far as the international realm goes. So I'll stop there and turn it back to you.
Yes, you can hear me. So if we look at the map behind us here, and following up on your description of things being at the very worst now, could you just sort of point out where you think, what you think are the very worst situations that need the most rapid attention and genuine American attention? Because it seems that when President Trump sends out his envoys, even if they're not confirmed by the Senate, let's say, and not responsible to the Congress directly in that form, but nevertheless he sends them to the places where things seem to be at their worst or pretty bad. So he seems to have a good notion of the worst things. But what do you rate as the worst situations? Why don't you start?
Okay, I'll leave plenty for you, Chris. There's 54 countries. So my personal point of view, we've had conflicts up there that have been going on for a long, long, long time. Horrendous human suffering, some a shorter period of time. I mean, you know, if you ask most people, what's the world's conflict in the world right now, they're going to say Gaza, probably. But the actual worst conflict in the world right now is Sudan, where you have, 30 million people facing starvation, 8 million people have been displaced, hundreds of thousands, millions maybe, have been killed. So that one desperately, I think, needs attention. The other place, and then I'll turn it over to Chris, the other place I think that really needs attention is the Sahel, which is a huge zone between the temperate parts of Africa and the Sahara Desert. It's a region as big as Australia, goes from the Atlantic over there to the Red Sea. All those countries are about twice as big as Texas. 3 of them have coup governments right now. And I don't want to badmouth the Biden administration, but they screwed this one up really bad. We got kicked out of Niger because of what I referred to earlier as moralizing and lecturing them. They're coup governments. The people on the street actually welcome the governments because they replaced corrupt dictatorships that have stolen the elections. Now they're going in a bad direction. We should have been there all along to hold their hand, but we weren't. The extremism is moving from those countries towards coastal West Africa, and I hope that that will stop, but I'm not confident. So those are the two situations I would talk about.
Sure, I will reinforce the Sahel, because if you look at the map and you see where the Sahel is situated, then you have to tell yourself that if the Sahel goes down, then you have a swath of land which goes all the way from the Atlantic Ocean, except for Mauritania. It would obviously impact Mauritania, but then you would have a line that goes all the way from the Atlantic Ocean across the entire continent into the Red Sea and the Indian Ocean, because you connect Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, Chad, which is still unstable, and then you get into Sudan with its own conflicts, and then you get into the Horn, where Al-Shabaab is still very active. Also, that the Sahel is, in the past, when the Sahel was doing well, it was like the buffer zone between North Africa and the Middle East and Sub-Saharan Africa. And if the Sahel goes, then even some of the now stable emerging democracies or emerging economies would also feel that impact. In fact, a number of the coastal West African countries have become pretty unstable just because of the happenings in the Sahel. We also have to keep in mind, as you all know, I imagine, that a lot of these countries have got ethnic affiliations across national boundaries, and so when they're impacted, populations in neighboring countries are also impacted. They also have very porous borders that allow both good elements or good actors as well as some of the bad actors to move back and forth. Secondly, I will talk about the DRC and Eastern Congo, because we all know the statistics of the atrocities that have been committed in Eastern Congo for years. And the fact that the instability in Eastern Congo impacts all of the Great Lakes region, which is Rwanda, Burundi, and Uganda, as well as Tanzania, by the way, as well as Congo itself. And so while Congo is at the heart of the continent, while Congo is cited as this country that is home to a lot of the rare minerals that could be of interest to the United States and to the private sector as well, you're not going to be able to achieve those economic goals if you can't bring a modicum of stability and good governance to the Congo. In fact, the dilemma that some Africa watchers have had with regards to Congo and Rwanda is that on the one hand, they have a big, sizable country with a lot of mineral wealth that has been wobblish all along and has had real difficulties managing its own affairs. And then on the other side of the border, they have a smaller country, troublesome as it may be, which seems to have its house in order. And that makes it even difficult for people to look across and criticize Kagame for some of the issues that have come up with regards to human rights and political space and the ability to integrate more young people and create the environment for a peaceful transfer of power across generations. I think if you can focus on those three problem areas for the continent, it would allow some of the other countries that are doing well, relatively well, the Botswanas, the Namibias, even the South Africa, the Ghanas, and to some extent the Cote d'Ivoires, to really emerge and also thrive. Thank you.
Did you come back from your trip with hope? And if so, where would you say your principal hope is? Is there any good news to report?
Well, I was in Cote d'Ivoire, as Roy just said, because Cote d'Ivoire was coming up to presidential elections, which just took place on the 27th of October. And in some ways, it did mirror the challenges that we see across the continent with regards to elections that are becoming increasingly controversial, or in some cases, kind of voided of their substance, and where people go through the emotions, as Tibor was saying, of organizing some event and then calling them elections. It was a process where the incumbent president has got a track record of good performance. You go into Abidjan today and you see actually that there's an infrastructure that is developed that can sustain economic activity, that the government is running, and there's services that are being provided to citizens, that the growth, economic growth has been on the positive trajectory for a number of years. And so there's a record for the president to run on. The unfortunate thing I thought and I saw on the ground was that going into the elections, there'd been a number of processes that had ended up with two of the major candidates, opposition candidates, not being in the race. And my sense is that if they had been in the race, it would have been a more inclusive and competitive process, and there would be no questions about the outcome. But the fact that they couldn't compete left a lot of their supporters with the impression that there was a deliberate effort to exclude them from the process, and maybe for a number of months and maybe the foreseeable future, people will continue to question the outcome of this election. Now, when I extrapolate what happened in Cote d'Ivoire to what we're now seeing in Cameroon, where a 93-year-old, I don't want to, should I say president? And a 93-year-old individual who has been in power for 43 years still wanted to seek an eighth term to serve another 7 years.
He's already the oldest president on earth, isn't he?
He's already the oldest president on earth. In a country where the average age is 19, you wonder what's going through his mind and through the minds of people who want to keep him on the ballot. And now the country is tumbling into another crisis on top of the crisis that it's already facing in the northern part of the country, where Boko Haram incursions from northeastern Nigeria cross the border, those porous borders into Cameroon, where instability in the Lake Chad Basin also crosses the borders into northern Cameroon, plus the fact that for 8 years now running, Cameroon has been going through what the Norwegians have described as the most uncovered, the most underreported conflict on the African continent, in the conflict that is taking place in the Anglophone regions of the country. And you wonder why a leader who still has some thoughts going through his mind would want to take on or push the country into yet another overlapping conflict around the elections.
But what is the American role in this? What can the United States do about these things?
Well, interestingly, during Trump won, he took a tough stance on Cameroon. To his credit, he took Cameroon off the AGOA, the African Growth and Opportunity Act, opportunity privileges, which allow African countries to export to the United States, to have access to the American market. And we know that in many countries, Kenya, South Africa, Namibia, Botswana, countries have actually benefited. Mauritius, countries have actually benefited from the AGOA initiative when it was existing. Trump took Cameroon off because of its human rights records. It also curtailed the military assistance, the security assistance that was helping Cameroon fight Boko Haram in the northern part of the country in terms of sharing intelligence or having access to intelligence assets.
So he did the right thing.
At that time, the right thing was done. My hope is that the right thing could still be done with Cameroon, because the problem in Africa, as we all know, is the contagion effect of African politics, that when there are conflicts, as we just discussed, then they tend to multiply. When the military coup, the first military coup succeeds, then you have a series of military coups that follow. At the same time, if there are good things that happen, there's the potential, the possibility that other good things would happen as a follow-up.
Tibor, you wanted to say?
Yeah, the problem now is, as I mentioned, we don't have an assistant secretary for Africa. Back then, Chris, interestingly enough, the senator who called me when I was assistant secretary about Cameroon was Marco Rubio. He obviously constituency. Right now, thankfully, Senator Risch, who is chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, has been making statements on Cameroon. But it looks like, as Chris said, he's done it now 8 times. And it's always the same scene. He steals the election. He will arrest, harass whatever opposition leaders or other troublemakers. The people are in an uproar. They will come out on the street. They'll have what they call ghost towns, where they literally shut down the cities and as much of the country. And then, unfortunately, it's like a balloon that loses air. You know, over time, people have to live paycheck to paycheck. They don't have a freezer to fill with food. They have to go to the market every couple of days, and then life slowly returns, and he gets away with another stolen election. And unfortunately, in the past, while the United States has been pretty tough with him, the French didn't care, because he was a patron of the French. So by playing out, off one side against the other, when it comes to the outside influencers, he's gotten away with it. And other African leaders are also pretty good at playing that game.
So, Chris, let me ask you a question. What is your principal criticism, if you're able to do that, of the administration approach to Africa? I assume you did not disagree when the president's senior advisor on Africa, in lieu of having an assistant secretary of state, made his first trip into the Congo. And then he headed to Sudan to try to get a ceasefire, which obviously did not work in the first instance, but I think he's trying again. Do you think that, in a sense, that the president's instincts were right in these cases?
Well, I commend the efforts in the DRC. It's got to be, someone needs to try to make the effort to bring peace to that part of the continent. And incidentally, even before the Congo, there were some strike actions against Al-Shabaab in Somalia. And I think that every effort that goes towards bringing peace or creating an enabling environment on the continent should be commended. If I had a criticism, really, I think it would be that Africa needs people like Ambassador Tibor Nagy, who know the continent, who can feel the pulse of the continent, because it's a continent on which things don't work solely because you want them to work in a certain fashion. You've got to have your finger on the pulse of what the Africans want. The continent is gone in its history. It's gone through so much hardship in global affairs. I don't want to go back to the colonial era. I don't want to go back to neocolonialism in the post-independence era. But it's a continent that can tough it out. And sometimes, for its honor or its pride, people can tough out a difficult situation, irrespective of what it is you offer. And I think, the new emphasis on commercial diplomacy, it's great. It's got some potential. But you can't do that in a vacuum. And you have to create an enabling environment around that, so that even if that's your priority, you can see some dividends come out from that approach. If you don't, I worry that there may be a lot of attempts, there may be a lot of efforts, and of course, time would eventually run out without a lot of accomplishments. Thank you.
So, yes, Tibor.
Yeah, adding on to what Chris said, I philosophically have never liked special envoys because they tend to do what I would call drive-by diplomacy. You have a nice photo op, you get the two leaders there to sign a piece of paper, but then what? It can only be implemented by hard, consistent work, and the envoy really can't do that, especially when you have an envoy that's responsible for all of Africa who flits from crisis to crisis. I went back, one of my first statements was that Africa is our lowest geopolitical priority. That is characterized by having the smallest embassies in the world. Imagine a country like Nigeria, 230 million people, and we only have 2 offices. In France, we have 10 or something like that. So you need to be able to make those things happen. DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo, which has never been democratic or a republic, richest country on earth, in mineral terms, $37 trillion worth of minerals, and yet amongst the poorest people. It's extremely complicated. So the Rwanda DRC deal, yes, his instincts, Bulos, the special envoy, we'll call him, right. A commercial deal that would be win-win for both countries would make sense, but that needs so much work to make it happen. And then there are other factors there which are existential for the Rwandans, and if those are not considered in there, the peace will never work. The peace will never work. And then one more thing, Chris mentioned, he didn't want to go back to colonial times, but when I teach my Africa class, I tell my class, there's only one thing, if you take one thing away from this course, I want you to understand that the way the colonial powers created the countries on this map are totally artificial. Totally artificial. Those lines on there exist for the benefit of the colonial powers, and it's almost, if they wanted the continent to fail into the future, they could not have done a better job than of drawing the lines the way they did.
It seems to me that one of your criticisms on both of you is that the organization of diplomacy in the administration is lacking, that you might have a special advisor or special envoy who's going to the right places and doing even the right things, but he needs backup, and he needs support throughout, and he needs a policy that deals with all of that, with all the other players in Africa. But that raises an interesting question. Mr. Bulos, is it Hamad Bulos? Masad Bulos, is a newcomer to diplomacy as far as I know. How is he doing? I mean, is he good? Is he competent? Does he follow through? Is he organizing the diplomacy for these huge crises that he's been attending to? Or is he leaving that to chance? Give me your best assessment.
That would be you, because I haven't met him.
Okay.
Still waiting
He hasn't met you either. And that's, I mean, has he met Africa experts in Washington, for example?
He has. He has some.
That's a relief. Okay.
He has some. I was still serving as acting as undersecretary when he came on board. And a lot of the people said, oh, you know, he doesn't know anything. And then I met him. And after talking to him, I said, okay, give the guy a chance, because he's somebody who has been doing business in Nigeria. Those of you who know Nigeria would have to understand that anybody who can successfully do business in Nigeria has something going for them. But then it gets beyond that, because yes, you might have the right instincts, but I did a briefing with him on Democratic Republic of Congo. To truly understand some of these situations, I mean, they are literally like peeling an onion, and you need expertise to advise, to assist, to work with you. So yes, your instincts can be great. I agree totally with Chris. Commercial diplomacy can do so much for Africa, but you need to have that support.
So folks in the audience here with us, if you have questions, we have a microphone over here to my right, and you're welcome to queue up. And likewise, members of the audience on Zoom, don't forget, we're very happy to hear your questions, and we will put as many of them to our guest speakers as we can. The Economist had a article recently, and it started off saying, dismantling USAID is causing chaos. Clinics are running out of medicines, especially for fighting AIDS. Death from cholera is going up. Anti-malaria supplies have been disrupted. Are the projects that NGOs did, and it's a fascinating point you make that NGOs were in a way leading American policy in Africa, are they really wasted effort, or don't they really do something useful for humanity?
Well, there's Definitely a role for non-governmental organizations. It's, a huge continent, 54 countries, and 1.4, 1.5 billion people. Governments that are still facing a lot of challenges governing effectively. And so there's enough room for non-governmental organizations to be able to add value in helping improve the well-being of people on the African continent. I think the issue wasn't really how one administration may want to redefine or restructure how it engages in humanitarian actions or foreign assistance or international assistance. There was an element of abruptness that took people unawares. And I think in the humanitarian sectors where lives were dependent on that form of assistance, that the shocks were probably more difficult to absorb, and the damage is more certain than in some of the other areas in which civil society organizations are involved. Coming out of the Côte d'Ivoire trip that we talked about, one of the things that I really wanted to see for myself was how partner organizations, African homegrown organizations, are adjusting to some of the cuts that we've seen in recent months. And this is also coming after I visited Morocco and saw the Mo Ibrahim Governance Weekend. During the Mo Ibrahim Governance Weekend, interacting with African civic leaders who were talking about some of the steps that many of them are now taking to adjust. Because we have to keep in mind that the cuts have not just happened in the US. Even the Europeans, a number of the European countries have taken a similar path in reducing the level of foreign assistance that they had in the past. And so what we're seeing across the continent, which was heartening for me coming out of the Côte d'Ivoire experience, is that the advocates are still there. They're still in the trenches. They're as determined as ever. They may not have as many resources as they had in the past, but they're taking ownership of some of those processes as well. And so being in Côte d'Ivoire and seeing Ivorian civil society organizations organize themselves to recruit, train, and deploy thousands of their own election monitors was very refreshing. In fact, I even joked with some of them. I said, oh, I went into their command center, where they're getting all the data and they're doing their analysis, and you have young, hundreds of young people working with laptops, talking to their counterparts in the field, monitoring their election process. I said to them, I am so relieved that, on the issue of branding, I don't see you all, branding is the process by which organizations acknowledge the support that they get from partners. And it used to be in the past that you would go into a room and you see these young people wearing T-shirts, they have logos, European Union logos, UN, and of course USAID as well, and many others. And it came across as though they were accomplishing a task for these other organizations that provided the resources. Now, what I saw 2 weeks ago, or a week ago in Abidjan, is the same young people having the T-shirts with their national colors on them, but doing similar things that they've done in past years. And my sense is that if we can sustain them through the process of taking ownership on some of these governance processes that they engaged in the past with support from international NGOs, in a few years, it would be their processes, they would own them, and they would be more committed to see them to fruition and to see the impact that some of that can begin. So while there's the damage done on the humanitarian side, I think with regards to the governance issues, there's still something that can be salvaged, and some of the partner organizations are going about trying to salvage that on their own. Thank you.
Fascinating. Let's go to the first question.
Hi. Economic development, regional trading partners. Could you talk about how strong are neighboring countries working together to promote trade between them? Something like the European Union the North American Trade Association, et cetera.
So is there trade?
Yeah, you ask a very good question. A while ago, I talked about the artificial borders in Africa. So the genuine natural units in Africa are the regional blocks. And some of the regional blocks are stronger than others. But then the Africa Union has had this initiative of the Africa-wide Free Trade Union, which would include the entire continent, which would be wonderful. The problem gets into the implementation and the intra-African trade because there's so many obstacles, both to transportation and intra-African trade. You can have the best agreements on paper, but if you're a truck driver and you leave at any African major city, within the first 10 miles, you're going to come across at least 5 people in uniforms with a rope across the road who are going to shake you down for, some kind of a payoff. So those are the fundamental issues that on the one hand, you can have the theoretical and the intra, national agreements and things like that, but it actually has to work. As I mentioned before, Africa is the richest continent, in the globe with the poorest people. And that is a fundamental disconnect that needs to be addressed before that will work, because the resources are incredible and the rest of the world realizes that.
Yeah, I would just add that, of course, the regional entities, COMESA and SADC and ECOWAS are great, and even IGAD, very helpful. And now this additional step of talking about the African Free Trade Zone is very impressive. It portends a lot of hope and promise on the economic front. The issue is in the implementation, as Tibor just said. I would also recommend that we keep an eye on some of the initiatives by African private sector in commodities that have transnational values or assets. And so I am very intrigued and really interested by what Dangote is doing in Nigeria with the refinery that tackles a major issue that Africa has had, or African countries have had for years. Because just the notion and the practice, it was really a practice, that countries like Angola, Nigeria, Gabon, the oil-producing countries, Congo-Brazzaville, Equatorial Guinea, would produce crude oil, ship it overseas for refining to foreign refineries, and then re-import finished products at higher prices. It's just, you don't have to be an economist to see why those countries will go bankrupt, because they will subsidize those products from the public treasury. And that would take away resources that could go into other sectors, such as developing infrastructure or investing in education and public health. Now, if you have someone like Dangote, who is one of the richest people on the continent, open up a refinery in Nigeria that can refine oil from Nigeria, from Angola, from Equatorial Guinea, then you have some value being added to African products on the continent itself. And I think that would give more weight to this concept of having the Africa-wide free trade zone in a way that can make value, can provide opportunities to add value on African products on the continent itself and create jobs for all of these young people that we worry about.
So what you're saying is missing is infrastructure and safety on the road. And that's why you can't really have free trade in Africa, unfortunately.
And proper investment.
A lot of investment.
And governance. Yes.
Anything else? Ken.
Good evening. Could you talk about the effectiveness of the African Union as they've? Say again. Okay, thank you. Could you talk about the effectiveness of the African Union, although they have created a mandate and sent it to the UN under their new research, and they also decided to take on the problems in Madagascar. But what it seems to be, as we're talking now, we don't seem, haven't heard us point toward the responsibility of the African Union for economic, social issues that we've kind of brought up here. Could you talk about that?
I'll be non-politically correct. I'm not a fan of the African Union, honestly. It's a talk shop. They spend a lot of money to show you the low priority. Even the countries that belong to it are very slow in paying their dues. When I was ambassador to Ethiopia, I was also, at that time, the U.S. did not have an ambassador to the African Union. We do now. So it was me. And I would go to them, and I had a good friend there who was in charge of their political affairs, and he was always hitting me up for money. And I said, show me a success, do something, have a successful something. Finally, once he called me over with a big smile on his face and said, we had a success. It was in the Comoros Islands. So I said, okay. So I got him a couple of $1 million or something like that. They are not doing what they said they would be doing. And also they're captive of their host country. There was a big fight when the African Union, or the precursor, the Organization of African Unity came about, whether you put it in a Francophone country or an Anglophone country. They ended up putting it in Ethiopia because Ethiopia was never colonized, and it's neither, Francophone or Anglophone. But right now, basically, Ethiopia is involved in a lot of issues in Africa, and the African Union cannot step on Ethiopia's toes. So to me, it's not a very effective organization. Sorry.
I agree with that. Because it's true that people and countries seeking opportunities to engage with Africa would tend to think about the African Union as the first stop, or port of call. We are familiar with the fact that Africa now has an observer status with the G20, and it's the African Union that takes that seat when the G20 meets. But I would hasten to say that the African Union is not meeting the expectations of the African people. That when the transformation was done in 2000, between 2000 and 2002, to transform the Organization of African Unity, which a number of Africans had already dismissed as a club of heads of states who didn't care about the people, that there was considerate effort put into defining a new legal framework for the African Union. That if you read the African Union Charter, it's as progressive a document as you could find. That if you read the African Union's own charter on democracy, elections, and governance, that was adopted in 2007, it's a very progressive document. But when you see how the African Union acts, you cannot help but be disappointed. Tanzania just had a very messy election, very messy elections. People were killed. People were in the streets. Opposition parties are in jail. The incumbent president was declared the winner with 97% of the vote. 24 hours, not even 24 hours after that announcement, the African Union congratulated the winner of the elections in Tanzania. We have had terribly flawed elections on the African continent, where Africans have died trying to make a choice and get a voice. And the African Union hasn't condemned any one of those elections. Wow. I think we should keep our eye on the relationship between the African youth, that Gen Z generation, and the African Union. And that sooner or later, the African youth are going to be saying loud and clear that the African Union doesn't matter, it doesn't count, it's ineffective and ineffectual, and ought to be discarded. And that would be an unfortunate commentary, but it's true.
So that raises an interesting question, a fascinating point. There have been several uprisings or street demonstrations or protests or just in the last couple of weeks. And they seem to be, to some degree, supported by, if not incited by, Gen Z young Africans. What is going on here? Who's behind them? Are they good for Africa, or could they go bad?
I personally think they're great for Africa. I've been waiting for this for a long time. I was waiting when the young people would do like in the movie network and go out and say, we're mad as hell and we're not going to take it anymore. Because you have, as Chris said, populations where the average age is 19 or even lower in some countries. And you have leaders who are 3, in some cases 4 times or more older than those folks that have absolutely nothing in common. And as I've told people, African youth have the exact same wishes as the youth do in America and Europe and Asia. And they are being frustrated. They have access to technology, and they see what people in other parts of the world are like. So there's kind of 3 choices. Either the governance and the countries can change so they can have their wishes fulfilled, or they're going to take off for Europe, or they're going to join extremist organizations to overthrow the governments.
But in the case of Madagascar, they led a revolution of a sort, which was followed by a military coup. That doesn't sound like a good ending.
Well, I would say, I have the good fortune to have worked on the Madagascar elections in 1992. And I saw the elections between Admiral Didier Ratsirac, who was a very highly respected, highly decorated Navy officer, and Professor Albert Zav, who was a chemistry professor at the university. Wasn't worthy at all, wasn't interested in politics. But people just wanted change in Madagascar, and they voted for Albert Zav. What the Gen Z generation is doing in Africa is healthy. It's healthy for the continent. It's about time. And they have good reason, they have good cause. And the precursor to what we're seeing right now was what took place in Nigeria with the NSAS movement. It was a movement led by young Nigerians who were just tired of police brutality. And they mobilized millions of Nigerians to take to the streets. Of course, they suffered some casualties, people lost lives, people were brutalized, but the Buhari government at the time made some concessions to the young people. And after 2022, they decided to transform that energy coming from the NSAS movement into the political process in Nigeria. And they too, they should be commended for that as well. Because in that process, they were able to project a candidate who had a very small political party into a national figure. Because the Nigerian youth became part of the Peter Obi movement. And Peter Obi was the youngest of the elderly statesmen who were running for office in Nigeria. And he seemed to capture the youth, the aspirations of the young people. And so they channeled their efforts into the political process. Peter Obi didn't get elected in 2023, but we're seeing a lot of young Nigerians working for electoral and political reform in Nigeria. Look at what they did in Kenya. The Gen Z movement was really upfront about transparency in budget management. And the beauty of the Gen Z movement so far is that they come out on issues. They're not just trying to burn down the city. They come out with concrete grievances that people can relate to. And that's why they're so popular. And I think that in Madagascar, if African governments cannot create opportunities for people to have confidence in institutions, in knowing that they can petition their member of parliament and they can get their voices heard, and parliament can initiate reforms that address the issues that they care about, people are going to be left with no options but to take to the streets. And you can't blame them for that. And if in some cases the military then takes advantage of that opening and steps in, you also cannot blame the military as unprofessional as coups may be.
There are many rare minerals sourced from Africa that the U.S. relies on, particularly in the technological industries. That being said, there are several humanitarian concerns about labor within the region, such as child labor, inhumane conditions, and despite its illegality, slavery. Many in the U.S. would make the reasonable argument that we have a moral obligation not to source materials from these avenues and effectively support these practices. However, many of our competitors, such as China, who is a global frontrunner in both trade and technologies, have less concern for such considerations. So my question is just, as a country, how should we remedy both of these issues, and do we need to take time to consider the need versus the method that we procure these resources?
Could you contrast the U.S. and Chinese policies when in relations with Africa?
I think you have to address ethnical problem in African countries. I will not go further, just to mention Somaliland is successful story, why international community doesn't recognize as an independent country.
If you could comment on the role that large multinational corporations are playing in Africa.
I would like to talk about Eswatini and how it's like the last remaining monarchy in Eswatini, well, total monarchy. Would it be better for it to move to be a democracy, or would it be better to stay a monarchy, because with that country, its establishment was a monarchy from the beginning?
Thank you for this opportunity. I'm from Cameroon, and Sir Fomunyoh, who is sitting there, is also from Cameroon. And you guys know what's going on right now. I would like to know what America is doing about it, because youth are dying, and our right has been violated. It's like we don't have right to choose the candidate that we want. So I want to know what America is doing about it. Thank you.
I'm from Kenya and South Sudan, and I wanted to ask question most basis of like involvement of the United States to like countries like Sudan, especially like since they had all this partnership when like US used to take oil in South Sudan and they in Sudan, sorry, and then all of a sudden they stopped, and then they carried like visa. They had a visa ban to Sudanese who supposed like not to come to the country, and also like after the war broke out and all that, when Trump administration came up, they carried the humanitarian, and also like my question was more of like there is too much involvement of the United States in African countries, and I wanted to know, is these statistics that you made earlier, is it based on like the statistics or not? Because I'm also from South Sudan, and we have such a big land in equatorial side, southwest side of Juba, where basically there's so much gold, and that land is actually being protected by the Americans, and you can't enter into it. And also, like, if you look into the Kenyan 2024 finance bill, US actually did have a whole part of it, and I think and a lot of Kenyans died, Gen Z, as you mentioned, during the protests. Thousands of them died, but it wasn't documented at the same time. So my question is, we have such a very poor news outlet, most cases in countries that I mentioned, and there's not that much big information that comes out, and it's really vague, and sometimes the government tries to put it down so it doesn't look that bad outside, and it's actually bad. So my question just was back to your first statement when you said US doesn't actually have that much part of like hand in Africa. I believe they do have, and it's actually affecting a lot of African countries.
So thank you. My name is Jackie Malomba, visiting Goucher from Kenya. And as a woman heavily involved in advocacy work and looking at how the marginalized groups can be involved in the leadership of Africa, we are a bit concerned, and I would like to hear your views around it. Marginalized groups, we're talking about the youth, we're talking about the disabled, and we are talking about the women. Now we've been pushing for leadership by the youth. We are happy about Burkina Faso, but we are a bit concerned about the way the youth are being killed and they're being targeted. And then when we are pushing for women to be in leadership, then we see what is happening in Tanzania. We get a bit discouraged, and honestly, I don't have any more strength to actually fight for women to lead. So I would like your comment in regards to that. And just looking at Africa Union,
Can we go to the last question, please?
What is the role, what do you perceive as the role for the African diaspora in order to fix some of those issues? Because we are one of the most diverse, most dedicated, most powerful as far as what we do here in the world, yet we have almost no say to what happens in our native country. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll try to do a number of them all at once. I love the last question about the African diaspora. Remember in my opening comments I said that Africa is the last geopolitical priority of the United States because of a lack of strong constituency of support for Africa. I have real hope for the African diasporas as they gain professional skills, power, economic power, and that will translate to political power. For example, Ethiopian community was very proud that in the last Virginia governor's election, they all switched over to the Republican, Youngkin, and they credit themselves with actually getting Youngkin over because they were so disappointed in the Democrats. And I hope that more African diasporas will become politically active so that the American government starts paying attention. Because right now there's really not a strong constituency. Some few businesses, NGO community, but that's it. Then a number of the people brought up a whole bunch of questions and why doesn't the United States, focus on that, focus on that, focus on that. I get that question all the time. And I'm very realistic about that. The United States of America in foreign policy responds to domestic constituencies and domestic pressures because domestic politics is a lot more important to the United States government than foreign relations. Like it or not, that's the way it is. So if people want the United States of America to act on one, this, that, or the other, the political pressure has to come from here because having managed embassies and worked in the State Department, you can't fix everything. You can't give attention to everything. And there's so many single issue people that all they care about is that one single issue and they don't care about anything else. Well, that's not how it works. So if people want to fix something, you better do it through domestic political pressure. And then finally, the way to address some of those problems, and we wanted to do this during Trump 1, but we couldn't do it. I've always maintained, both of us have visited almost every single African capital, and even the dictators, the worst dictators are afraid of their young people. They don't want to be hanging from the lamppost. The electricity may not work, but there's a lamppost. The young people want jobs, and the Chinese are not going to bring them jobs. It's Western companies that bring the jobs. And by offering jobs for their young people brings you a lot of political pressure where you can say, you want investments, here's what you need to do. You need to set up an environment that American companies are going to want to invest in, which means treating women equally, lessening corruption, having better elections, and things like that. So we have fantastic companies, and our companies create lots of jobs. If we could channel that, maybe this administration, we could do a lot more good than giving lectures with a megaphone and issuing statements in Washington that are feel good for the community but don't actually achieve anything.
Well, very good questions, and I apologize that we're not going to be able to respond to all of them, but I think, Tibor's, with your permission, I can pledge that if Roy and the Hughes Center get us back here, we'll be delighted to come back and continue the conversation because a number of very interesting points have been raised. I'll just take 2 points. The question on Cameroon, it's a question that comes up all the time because even Cameroonians in the United States have gone through hell. They had a protective status because of the conflict, and the status was taken away, and now we have people from a country that used to be doing very well when Ambassador Tibor was the deputy ambassador in Cameroon. The prospects look good. In the 80s, Cameroon was one of the few African countries that had 3 major American banks. We had Bank of Boston, Bank of America, and Chase Manhattan. They had business in Cameroon. Cameroon was doing well. And we're now where we are, and we have to deal with the consequences of misrule and bad governance for the past 4 decades, which is most unfortunate. One of the things that I've already seen thus far, which may not be tangible, but it's significant, even for those autocrats, they want recognition. They love the invitations that come from the international community or the recognition. So far, Cameroon, the United States has not given Cameroon the letter of congratulations that the autocrat is desperately eager to receive. That by itself, it could be symbolic, but it's a very strong statement. And then we have people like Chairman Rich, Senator Rich from Idaho, who chairs the Africa subcommittee in the US Senate, who's been very vocal and who is paying attention to African issues. And he just today or yesterday issued a statement, a strong statement on Cameroon. And the more we can get people like him stand out and speak up, the more people can feel that the United States is also paying attention to their cause and to their issues. And talking about Senator Rich reinforces the point we made at the beginning, that sometimes you need people who know the continent. And he's got a great staff of people who care about African issues and who pay attention and who can help him and other congressional leaders do that. And we have to keep in mind that unlike in many countries where all the power is in the executive branch, in the United States, Congress is a co-equal branch of government, and they have voice as well. And so we should be reaching out collectively to them as well. On the last point with regards to the diaspora, the question from my brother Theo, it just warms my heart. And I think it's an excellent point for us to finish this conversation on, because that too, there lies some of the hope, some of the bright spots with regards to Africa. Because in 2024, the African diaspora, in terms of remittances sent to the African continent, $100 billion US. And this is World Bank statistics in 2024 alone. And that amount of money was more than all of the development assistance that the continent was receiving. So the diaspora has got tremendous potential. And the countries that have been able to tap into that resource, such as Ghana, have seen direct benefits to their economic indicators and to their economic development. You now have people who spend summer in the United States and all of winter in Ghana. And they bring with them opportunities for jobs, for business transactions with the private sector, for investments in real estate and other things that can improve the world, for investments in technology and data processing. You have American firms that process data in Ghana and get transferred the results into the United States. There are tremendous opportunities for countries that can tap into the diaspora. And my hope is that at some point in time, there's going to be that combination between the African youth, the Gen Z generation, and their access to technology, their expertise in technology, with the African diaspora to create a new wave of improved well-being for Africans. And that, for me, remains a source of hope. So thank you for raising that question.
So I'd like to just say thank you very much for joining our panel tonight, both of you. I think I was expecting more disagreement, but I'm really encouraged that there's a lot of agreement, that there's almost a consensus. Secondly, I'm really fascinated by what you've said about Gen Z in Africa and the hope that people are placing in them. I hope they live up to it. Finally, I think the question and the answers about the diaspora are very, very encouraging. It does point in the direction of, if not a single policy, then the development of policy, development of interest, putting the spotlight on Africa again, making sure we don't walk away from it. So thank you so much for speaking tonight. I think we've all learned a lot.
much.